Hey guys, Chuck here with Miniature Marauder. So I bought these cheap trees on Amazon to add a little more variety to my tabletop gaming. These were really cheap, they came in a large pack of them, and I really felt like I could enhance them a bit. So the brand I found is called Lemax, and they had other brands, and they're all essentially the same type of tree, but this pack came with multiple different sizes. And so what I wanted to do was enhance them to be a little bit more realistic, have better snow coverage on them, and turn it into some scatter terrain. So what I'm going to do in this video is I will show you how I made this particular piece, and I will put all of the materials I used and links in the description below. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the little bases. We're going to have these washers on the bottom. Now this is optional. I like to add the washers because they add a little bit of weight to my terrain. If you're doing standalone trees, I would highly recommend it because, you know, if someone bumps the table, anything could happen. It just causes them to get knocked over, and this adds a little bit of stability. So I'm adding 3 rings to the bottom of each of the bases here. You just take a little bit of hot glue. It doesn't really matter if the ring is visible on the outside of this because it's going to get covered up with some filler here shortly. All right, so for this I'm doing 3 trees, and I'm just going to quickly kind of trace a rough area around. Then I'm going to skip ahead really fast, so it's going to be a bit choppy. I'm a slow worker, so I've got to kind of speed things up a little bit to make it a little more consistent. I'm going to cut around the outside of this cardboard chipboard, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, as long as your bases fit within the space that you're creating, it's perfect. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. All right, so now I've got kind of a base to go with, and I'm going to throw the smaller bases on top, kind of position them where they need to go, and add a little bit of hot glue to the bottom and just stick them in place, and they won't be going anywhere. They're going to stay pretty firm. All right, so for this, I recommend putting on some gloves. I'm using the wood filler that I typically use for a lot of my other projects. It does tend to get messy, but it adds really nice texture. It's cheap and easy to work with, and it dries relatively quick. So I'm just smearing it all over, trying to fill the gap in the space between the base and the chipboard, adding a little bit of depth to the overall piece, adding more in some spaces than others, because again, we don't want it to be fully flat earth. We want it to be more natural in its appearance. Now you can kind of just take your finger and put a thin layer across some of the cardboard layer. Again, it's just adding some texture to it, something to make adhesion a little bit easier when it comes time to kind of put a little bit of the snow on top. You want to make sure you're going around these bases, filling in the gap that overlaps the mounds. And, you know, it's up to you on really how you want to do it. I left these kind of snow mounds in place. You could always, of course, try to make it more subtle so there's no bump underneath where the tree is going to go. But really, it's not going to make a big difference here in the final product. All right, so going to go ahead here and go add a couple little bit more spots that I had missed. I'm going to tear up a couple of pieces of just some pink foam that I had. I'm adding some easy texture here. You don't have to make these or cut them with a blade or anything specific. Just take a couple of chunks, rip them up, and you're going to just add them to the piece. The wood filler will dry and help hold them in place. It's not 100% perfect, but when we're finished with the product, there'll be a nice layer of PVC glue over the top of it, so it should go. Or PVA glue, it'll make it stick into place. So what I actually ended up doing, because I'm kind of experimenting with this, I just went ahead and dipped them all into the wood filler, so the wood filler would kind of harden around, and it would make it a little bit easier to adhere to the base. All right, so the next step here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Mod Podge. If you haven't seen this before, there's a few good recipes that are out there. Folks recommend it. I believe Black Magic Craft is kind of where I got the original idea from, and he makes some incredible art. So if you haven't seen what he creates, head on over, check out Black Magic Craft. He makes some really, really stellar stuff. All right, so while the base is drying, I'm going to take some of my green flock here, and this is kind of a medium green. I've sprayed all the base trees down with 3M77. It doesn't take a whole lot. You just spray it over the branches, and then really aggressively just try to cover these trees up with your flocking. Now, you could leave it like this if you didn't want winter trees. You could just go over it a couple of times to get yourself a nice, fully fleshed out tree. I would recommend, if you're doing pines, to use a darker green than what I've used here. I'm just using what I have on hand. Honestly, it doesn't make too much of a difference for me because I am drenching these things with heavy snowfall. So this will make it a lot easier. And I'm going through each one, roll them around. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. You can get kind of messy with this. Whatever you don't end up using, of course, you can just recover all the excess flock and put it back into a container for your next project. All right, so this is the third of the trees. Once this one's done, what I'm going to do is, since there's a little metal bit at the bottom from where I pulled it off the base, I'm actually going to stick them down on some polystyrene to help stand them up a little bit. And then I'm going to use a water and PVA glue. You can just get like Elmer's glue, put it in a mister bottle. Make sure if you're doing that you're using a more... a bottle that's designed for misting instead of just straight spraying. What that'll do is it'll knock all of the flocking off. It'll make a huge mess, and it's not going to look good. If you get something that can kind of spray more of a mist or a spatter, you'll get better coverage overall on your trees. So again, going kind of quickly here. I am trying to drench these things in my PVA mixture. This gets kind of messy, so I just throw it in a cardboard box to just, catch all of the PVA that splatters all over the place. There's no real pattern to this. Just spray it all over. You can really drench this thing. The PVA is going to dry completely clear, and the nice thing is it's going to harden up all of your flocking, making it much more solid and stable. Now over the top, you want to do this from a top-down angle. I am taking some Woodland Scenic Snowflake, and I am just kind of covering the top layer. You can do this quite a few times. It's entirely up to you on how much snow you want. I'm going for a pretty heavy snowfall, so I'm trying to cover these things to the max. What I've gone ahead and done is I've already primed over after the Mod Podge mixture has dried. I just took a flat white primer. You can buy the cheap stuff at Walmart for like $4 a can. It just makes things a lot easier. I did get some weird bubbling that happened from the cheap can, which I hadn't seen occur before. But it doesn't matter. You're going to be covering it up with Snowflake. I also took some of those stone pieces that we had, and I just made them look more stony. You don't have to be fancy with it. I put down a brown layer, then a gray layer, and I just kind of mash it all together. Again, these are going to be covered with some snow, so it'll be easy. Now we're going to put down just some ground cover, right? Because there's going to be shrubs and bushes and all of that kind of stuff, and so just find a few places, dab a little bit of glue on the bottom side of them, and just find a place to stick them. I'm also adding some foliage. From Fine Leaf foliage that I had picked up from Woodland Scenics. This one was a little bit trickier, but you can use a good amount of Mod Podge or PVA glue to try to get them to stick into place. When you get to the final step, you're going to seal these up pretty well, so these won't fall apart as much as they did on me during this video. Because I was using the Fine Leaf foliage, one of the other things that I did was I snapped off one of the little branches. And I wanted to use that as deadfall so that there would be, some sticks on the ground, something that adds just a little bit more realism to it. And again, you can just kind of figure out where you want to put the deadfall. I just threw mine right here so it would be visible from the front side of the piece. Threw down some Mod Podge on top of it. To be honest, I kind of went a little too quickly with this, didn't let it dry in place fast enough. So I did fiddle with it more than I probably needed to, but for the sake of speed, I went ahead and just kind of started working and adding the snow flock. So again, we're going to use the 3M77. We're going to spray over the top of it, and then we're going to add some of the snowflake. Something to note here, I'm going to pretty much heavily dump this thing. I mean, I want to do as much coverage as I can. Same tack as always, make sure you've got a clean workspace, because whatever you dump on the table that you're not going to use, you can just recover it, put it back in the bottle, and you're good to go. You can also use a sieve for this. It works wonders on a lot of pieces. Unfortunately, I couldn't get as high up as I wanted because of my camera placement. I'll fix that next time. All right, so just pick it up, tap it off, and take a look at what you've got. What you're going to notice is you can still easily see the rocks, the shrubs, the deadfall. It's all still easy to identify. We're going to fix that up because we want to have some heavy snowfall on top. So we're going to take some of the PVA glue and we're going to start covering over the top pieces with that PVA so that we can put a second round of small flocking and just make it look like there's been a lot of snowfall resting on top of these pieces. Don't worry about being too picky about it. Just throw on the PVA glue over top, start like rubbing it on top of the bushes, patting it a little bit. The finely foliage will be a little trickier because it'll try to come up and off and onto your brush. But you can just kind of pat it on top, remove any of the small pieces that come off. It's not really a big deal. You're just trying to create a little layer so that the snowfall can rest on top of it. Now take some of your snow scatter and just start sprinkling it on over top. If you've put on some thick amounts of PVA glue, you're going to have to use a little bit more snowflake to it. It's going to absorb it into it. And you want to make sure it doesn't fully saturate it. Otherwise, it'll give it kind of a weird look to the snow. It won't look as natural. But if you do it just right, you'll get this nice fluffy looking snow on top of each piece. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take those trees and we're just going to put them in those center holes. We're going to get them ready for the final appearance. So here is the final piece that I've done. I actually sprayed it with a lacquer to make sure that we sealed everything in. I also, something I didn't show, I added a little bit of brown underneath where the tree trunks would be. Naturally, if there's a lot of heavy snowfall, it's going to be a spot where there's not a lot of snow able to get there. So you're going to see some of the natural ground beneath. And that's all it takes. This didn't take me very long to do. I really pulled this together in about an afternoon, so you could probably make a good couple dozen of these in a weekend if you're really dedicated. Thank you guys for checking out my tutorial. If you liked what you saw, please give us a like, a subscribe. More content will be on the way. If you'd like to find out more about what kind of projects I've been working on, you can head over to miniaturemarauder.com. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in a comment below. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.